Black, pregnant and abandoned, Maid inherited an old building. What she saw inside changed everything. Edna Williams stood frozen in the middle of the nursery, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other clutching an envelope from a lawyer. The smell of lavender and old wood filled the quiet brownstone. The room looked like it had been waiting for her: white crib freshly made, shelves stacked with untouched baby toys, and a hand-stitched frame on the wall that read, "Every child deserves to be welcomed into this world with love." Her eyes glistened as she whispered, "Why me?" Just hours earlier, she had learned that an elderly woman she'd cleaned for only once, 5 years ago, had left her this entire building. No family. No explanation. Just Edna's name written clearly in the will. She looked around, heart pounding. The house wasn't abandoned. It was prepared, almost expecting her. But for what? Who was Mrs. Hartwell, really? And how could a single meeting years ago have led to this life-changing gift? Before we uncover why a woman she barely knew became her guardian angel, I want to ask, has a stranger ever shown you kindness you didn't expect? Tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true stories. Tomorrow's story will move you even more. 6 months earlier, Edna Williams believed her life was finally moving forward. At 32, she had been working 3 cleaning jobs across Philadelphia, saving every spare dollar in a small jar hidden behind the cereal boxes. It had taken her almost 2 years, but she finally had enough for a deposit on a modest apartment, a space that would truly be her own. Every day, she woke before sunrise, packed her lunch in foil, and rode 2 buses between clients. Her body ached most nights, but she kept her dreams close. One day, she would return to school to become a social worker. One day, she would build a life that didn't feel like survival. Her boyfriend, Marcus, often told her he admired her drive. A sous chef at an upscale restaurant downtown, he carried the confidence she envied, well-dressed, charming, always smelling faintly of roasted garlic and cologne. When he moved into her small apartment, it felt like progress, like the beginning of something solid. They shared late dinners, whispered about future plans, even discussed a baby someday. But life rarely follows plans. The night everything shifted, Edna came home from her evening job at the Robinsons' house, exhausted and nauseated. The plastic pregnancy test was still in her pocket. She had stopped at the pharmacy on the way home, her hands shaking as she paid. She hadn't even opened it yet. When she stepped through the door, she froze. Marcus's duffel bag was by the entrance. He was standing by the window, his expression tense. "Edna, we need to talk," he said quietly. Something inside her sank. She set her bag down slowly. "What's wrong?" "That promotion in New York. I'm taking it. I leave tomorrow." Her breath caught. "Tomorrow? You didn't tell me you even applied." He nodded without meeting her eyes. "I didn't want to jinx it. But I got the call today. It's a big opportunity." She stared at him, confusion giving way to fear. "So what happens to us?" Marcus exhaled heavily, slinging the strap of his bag over his shoulder. "This thing between us, it's run its course." The word stung like ice water. "Marcus, Don't," he interrupted. "Whatever you're about to say, don't make this harder." Her hand slipped into her pocket, feeling the pregnancy test like a secret burning through fabric. She wanted to tell him. She wanted him to stay. But his eyes had already turned toward the door. That night, she sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the empty space beside her. When she finally took the test, the 2 pink lines appeared instantly. Her body went numb. 2 weeks later, her world fell apart again. Mrs. Chen, her longest employer, called her into the living room, a place Edna rarely entered unless dusting. "I'm very sorry," Mrs. Chen said softly. "My daughter is moving back from Boston with her family. She'll be taking over the household management. She handed Edna an envelope. This is 2 weeks' pay. You've been wonderful. Edna forced a smile, thanked her, and left before the tears could fall. Days later, the Robinsons told her they were downsizing. The Patels, her weekend clients, decided to hire a living cleaner. Within a week, all her income was gone. Rent was due in 2 weeks. She had no savings left after paying bills and food. Her body felt heavier each morning, not just from pregnancy but from the weight of uncertainty. She spent her days searching job listings, sending applications that went unanswered. Nights were worse, lying awake in her dark apartment, listening to the pipes creak, wondering how long before the landlord noticed her late payment. The morning she reached her breaking point, she sat on a worn bench outside the unemployment office, holding her cracked phone, trying to hide her face behind the sleeve of her coat. People passed without looking. She pressed her hand against her belly and whispered, "I'm trying." The phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. "Miss Williams," a formal voice said. "This is Thomas Crawford from Crawford & Associates. I've been trying to reach you regarding the estate of Mrs. Margaret Hartwell." Edna frowned. "I'm sorry, who?" "Mrs. Hartwell. According to our records, you provided cleaning services at her residence on Maple Street in 2019. Just once, through a temporary agency." She searched her memory. A kind elderly woman with silver hair. The faint smell of lemon polish and old books. They talked while Edna cleaned, about life, about how hard it was to keep dreams alive when the world expected so little from women like her. "I remember her," Edna said slowly. "But that was years ago." "Yes," the man replied. "Mrs. Hartwell passed away recently. In her will, she left her property to you, the brownstone on Maple Street and everything inside." For a moment, Edna thought she'd misheard. The noise of traffic filled the silence as she tried to process the words. "She left me her house." "That's correct," the attorney said. "You are the sole beneficiary." The call ended, but Edna sat frozen on the bench, phone still pressed to her ear. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the dark screen. Tired eyes, cracked lips, a woman on the edge. Why would a stranger leave her a house? She'd only cleaned for her once. As the first cold drops of rain began to fall, Edna stood slowly, one hand on her belly, the other clutching her phone. For the first time in weeks, she felt something she hadn't dared to feel, hope mixed with confusion. Whatever waited behind that front door on Maple Street, it was about to change everything. The brownstone stood silent on Maple Street, its red bricks darkened by years of city soot. Edna hesitated on the sidewalk, clutching the envelope from the lawyer in one hand and 3 old-fashioned keys in the other. The air smelled faintly of rain and iron. For a long moment, she simply stared at the building, half expecting someone to come out and tell her it was a mistake. She climbed the steps slowly, her body heavy from exhaustion and nerves. The front door lock resisted at first, but after a few tries, it turned with a dry click. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow hallway dimly lit by slivers of light from lace-covered windows. The air was thick with the scent of lavender, paper, and something faintly sweet, like the memory of tea left too long to cool. Inside, it felt like stepping into another time. The walls were lined with framed photographs, each one showing the same woman, Mrs. Hartwell, aging gracefully through the decades. In one photo, she stood in front of a classroom, chalk in hand. In another, she sat on a park bench feeding pigeons. No husband, no children, just the quiet passage of years written across her gentle smile. Edna ran her fingers along the edge of a photo frame, her eyes softening. It wasn't the lifeless emptiness of a forgotten house. It felt lived in. The furniture was old but carefully arranged, a faded floral sofa, lace doilies, an upright piano with sheet music still resting open. Dust coated the corners, but it wasn't neglect, it was time, waiting. She moved toward the kitchen. The tile floor was slightly uneven, the counters neatly organized. The appliances looked straight out of the 1980s, cream-colored and boxy, but when Edna opened the refrigerator, she froze. Inside were cartons of milk and juice, cans neatly stacked in the pantry, all dated within the last year. Someone had been caring for this place, maybe even up until recently. The thought sent a chill through her. Was someone living here? She whispered, though the silence swallowed her words. She made her way back to the hallway, one hand brushing against her belly, the other holding her phone's flashlight as daylight faded. The brownstone wasn't large, but every room seemed to hold a whisper of its former owner, a book open on a side table, knitting needles mid-project, slippers by a chair. It was as though Mrs. Hartwell had simply stepped out for a moment and never returned. At the base of the staircase, Edna hesitated. The banister gleamed faintly under her touch, polished smooth by years of hands before hers. She took a deep breath and began to climb, her footsteps soft against the creaking wood. The second-floor hallway was narrower than she remembered from her one cleaning job years ago. 3 doors stood closed. She turned the knob of the first one on the left. The master bedroom greeted her with soft afternoon light spilling through lace curtains. The bed was neatly made with a patchwork quilt, the colors faded but warm. On the nightstand sat a pair of reading glasses and a small Bible with a cracked leather cover. Edna touched it gently, noticing the name written on the first page, Margaret Louise Hartwell, 1961. A bookmark rested midway through the Psalms. Something about the room's simplicity made Edna's throat tighten. It was peaceful, untouched. A place where someone had once ended their days quietly. She closed the door softly and moved to the next room. When the light from the hallway fell across the space, she froze. It was a nursery. But not a forgotten one. The air smelled faintly of baby powder and cedar. The crib stood by the window, perfectly made with crisp white linens. A rocking chair sat nearby, a small blanket folded neatly over the armrest. Shelves along the wall held children's books and unopened toys, stuffed animals, wooden blocks, storybooks with their spines uncreased. Edna stepped inside slowly, her hand trembling as she reached for the embroidered frame above the crib. The stitching read, "Every child deserves to be welcomed into this world with love." Her breath caught. She pressed her other hand against her belly, her baby's soft movements fluttering beneath her palm. Tears stung her eyes. Someone had prepared this room with care. Someone who had known what it meant to long for a child. But why? Why would a woman who had no family, who barely knew her, leave behind a nursery waiting for a baby that was never born? Edna sat gently in the rocking chair, the wood creaking under her weight. The quiet was so deep it felt sacred. Sunlight drifted through the window, dust motes swirling like tiny fragments of memory. She closed her eyes, trying to understand what she was feeling. Sadness, gratitude, confusion, all tangled together. When she opened her eyes again, she looked around with new awareness. Every corner of the house held intention. The nursery wasn't just a room, it was a message. A promise. She whispered into the still air, "Mrs. Hartwell, who were you?" The only answer was the faint hum of the city outside and the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat. Whatever this inheritance truly meant, Edna knew one thing for certain. The woman she had met once, for only 4 hours, had left her something more than a house. She had left her a mystery, and maybe, a purpose. Edna's eyes followed the last trace of sunlight across the nursery floor before she noticed the third closed door at the end of the hallway. Her heartbeat picked up again. She hesitated, tightening her grip on the key ring, then slowly turned the knob. The door opened to a smaller room that smelled faintly of old paper and lemon oil. A desk sat neatly against the far wall, flanked by 2 tall bookshelves. Everything was in order, files stacked, pens arranged in a porcelain cup, curtains drawn halfway as if someone had just stepped out. Edna's footsteps were cautious. The carpet muffled her movements. She trailed her fingers over the desk surface, pausing at a small brass lamp and a collection of labeled folders, bank records, receipts, letters. She pulled one folder open and frowned. The documents were meticulous. Bank statements, tax slips, donation receipts. Mrs. Hartwell's income was modest, a teacher's pension and some savings, but the outflow told another story. Regular donations to women's shelters, educational scholarships, prenatal programs for single mothers. Thousands of dollars, every year. Edna swallowed hard, the realization settling over her. Mrs. Hartwell had been quietly helping women like her for decades. She turned the page and noticed a small leather-bound book centered on the desk. It was old but well kept, with a gold clasp that clicked softly when she opened it. On the first page, in neat handwriting, was written, "Personal Journal of Margaret L. Hartwell." Edna sat down in the worn desk chair and began to read. June 1967. The doctor says I can't have children. I smiled politely in his office, but when I came home, James couldn't even look at me. He said nothing, but his silence said everything. He wanted a family. I wanted one too. The house feels enormous tonight. Empty in a way I never knew was possible. Edna blinked through the words, imagining a younger Mrs. Hartwell, hopeful, heartbroken, alone in the same house. She turned the page. September 1972. James is gone. A sudden heart attack, they said. I keep walking into rooms expecting to find him, but there is only quiet. I don't know what comes next. Maybe the children at school will keep me grounded. Maybe they'll fill the space he left behind. Edna could feel the weight of years in each line. The loneliness, the resilience. She kept reading. March 1985. I've been teaching long enough to see my students grow up and start families of their own. Sometimes I envy them, but I've made peace with what I have. Their children are my legacy. Still, on some nights, the house feels too still. The entries were simple, almost restrained. But each one carried the ache of a life quietly lived in service to others. Edna turned several more pages until a date caught her eye. April 12, 2019. April 12, 2019. Today, a cleaning woman came to the house. Her name was Edna Williams. She moved slowly, as if her back carried more than just the weight of her body. Her eyes were tired, but she worked with dignity. When I offered her tea, she hesitated, perhaps unused to kindness. We spoke briefly. She reminded me of the young mothers I used to teach, full of potential but weighed down by circumstance. Edna's breath hitched. Her own name, written in neat cursive. She turned the page with trembling fingers. April 20, 2019. I've made my decision. If my time is short, I want what I have to go to someone who will make it matter. Edna is that person. I found her address through public records, in case I ever need to reach her. She doesn't know it yet, but she gave me back a sense of purpose just by existing with quiet grace. Edna's hand covered her mouth. She kept reading, her tears blurring the ink. January 2022. My heart is failing. The doctor says I should rest. I don't have family left, and I've stopped pretending that I do. But I've been watching over Edna from afar, her eviction notice, her job loss. She is expecting a child. Life has tested her, but she keeps moving. I have prepared a nursery in faith that she will find this home when she needs it most. The next page was the final one. 3 months ago. This is my final act of purpose. Edna is pregnant, alone, and soon to lose everything. I can't carry a child of my own, but I can ensure she and her baby have the foundation I never could. The nursery is ready. The crib waits in the light. Every child deserves to be welcomed into this world with love. The ink faded toward the end, as though her strength had been slipping away. Edna closed the journal and pressed it to her chest. The air in the room seemed to thicken around her as the truth sank in. This wasn't just charity. This was a connection, a bridge between two women whose lives had briefly touched but changed each other forever. Her sobs came quietly at first, then deeper. She leaned forward, tears wetting the old leather cover. For the first time in months, she didn't feel abandoned. She felt seen. When she finally lifted her head, the sun had gone down completely. The brownstone was dark, but it didn't feel empty anymore. Somewhere in this quiet house, she could almost sense Mrs. Hartwell's presence, a calm reassurance, a silent promise that everything was going to be all right. Edna stood, wiping her cheeks. She placed the journal back on the desk, then turned toward the nursery down the hall. The house was no longer just an inheritance. It was a message, a gift from one woman who had lost everything to another who was about to begin again. And for the first time in a long time, Edna allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she and her child had finally found home. The doorbell startled Edna out of her thoughts. She had been sitting in the nursery, lost in the silence, when the sound echoed through the brownstone. For a second, she considered ignoring it. But curiosity won. At the door stood an older woman with grey curls tucked under a knitted hat, holding a casserole dish covered in foil. "You must be Edna," she said, her voice warm and steady. "I'm Dorothy Harper. Margaret told me you'd come one day." Edna blinked. "She told you about me?" Dorothy smiled softly. "Oh, honey, she talked about you all the time. Said you were one of the few people who treated her like a person, not just another client." The words hit deep. Edna stepped aside to let her in. The smell of baked pasta filled the room as Dorothy set the dish on the kitchen counter. "She made me promise I'd check in when the time came. Said you might need a friend." Before Edna could respond, there was another knock. A tall man in overalls stood outside, holding a small toolbox. "Name's Mr. Kowalski. Margaret told me this railing was loose. Figured I'd fix it before you move in." He got to work without waiting for an answer, humming softly. A few minutes later, a young couple, the Martinez family from next door, arrived with a box of baby clothes. "These were our daughters," Mrs. Martinez said. "Margaret said they might be needed soon." It was like the entire neighborhood had been waiting for her. Edna's head spun. She tried to take it all in, each face, each small act of kindness. Mrs. Chen from the corner store came last, carrying a bag of groceries. She hesitated at the door, her expression uneasy. "Miss Williams," Mrs. Chen began quietly, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong to let you go like that." Edna froze. "She called me," Mrs. Chen continued. "Margaret did. Just before she passed. She reminded me of what you were going through that day and how quick I was to judge. I didn't know. She made me promise to make it right if I ever saw you again." For the first time in months, Edna didn't know what to say. Gratitude, disbelief, and sorrow tangled in her chest. She just nodded and whispered, "Thank you." As the evening light dimmed, the house came alive with quiet movement. Dorothy set the table. Mr. Kowalski tightened the porch bolts. The Martinezes folded baby clothes near the crib. It felt like a small community rebuilding itself, one that Margaret had somehow held together even after death. Later that night, when everyone had gone, Edna wandered back to the nursery. The room was bathed in the soft glow of the streetlight outside. She sat in the rocking chair again, the wood gently creaking beneath her. Something under the armrest caught her attention, a corner of tape, yellowed with age. She peeled it away carefully. A folded envelope was attached underneath. Her heart raced as she pulled it free. On the front, in careful handwriting, were the words, "For Edna, when she's ready." Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a letter written in the same neat script as the journal. My dear Edna, if you are reading this, it means you found your way home. That word, home, has carried many meanings for me over the years. There was a time I thought it meant family, then work, then the space left after both faded away. But I've learned that home is made when kindness is shared freely, without expectation. You may think this house is charity. It isn't. It's a circle completing itself. Many years ago, when I was your age, I was a widow with no savings. My rent was overdue, and I was too proud to ask for help. One morning, I found an envelope under my door, 6 months of rent, paid in full. There was no note, no name, only a message written on the back of an old receipt. Pass this forward when you can. I never discovered who helped me, but their kindness changed the course of my life. It allowed me to keep teaching, to keep giving, and, eventually, to meet people like you. When I saw how you carried yourself that day, tired but still proud, weary but still kind, I knew that the circle had come back around. This house is not a burden. It is a seed. Others have been preparing to help you, not because you asked, but because compassion grows when it's watered. They are your network now, your neighbors, your family. You don't owe anyone anything except to live well, raise your child with love, and one day, when the moment comes, pass the kindness forward again. With love, Margaret L. Hartwell. Edna held the letter to her heart, her tears falling silently. Every wall of the brownstone seemed to hum with life, the echoes of a woman's final wish, the warmth of strangers united by one act of goodness. She looked toward the crib, its white sheets glowing faintly in the light. We're going to be okay, she whispered to her unborn child. Outside, the street was quiet again, but Edna could feel the connection stretching far beyond the house. It wasn't just a building anymore. It was proof that one person's kindness could ripple through time, touching lives they would never meet. And somewhere, deep inside, Edna made a promise of her own, that when her time came, she would leave behind the same kind of light Margaret had given her. 6 months later, the air on Maple Street carried a quiet energy that hadn't been there before. The brownstone no longer stood in silence. It buzzed with new life. Edna stood on the front steps in her neatly pressed blouse, holding her daughter on one hip, watching workers fasten a bronze plaque beside the doorway. The metal gleamed in the morning sun. Hartwell House, a home for new beginnings. Tears stung her eyes, but this time they were from gratitude, not pain. What had once been an old stranger's home was now a sanctuary for women like her, women who had run out of options but not out of hope. Inside, the first floor had been transformed into a resource center. One corner served as a prenatal care office, another as a job placement hub. The pantry shelves overflowed with donated food and baby supplies. Flyers lined the bulletin board, local clinics, daycare contacts, counseling sessions, all free. The house that had once waited for a child now served dozens of mothers-to-be. Attorney Crawford stood in the foyer, reading from a clipboard. You're officially registered as a non-profit, he said, smiling. Margaret's savings covered the setup. You'll have a modest grant to start with. After that, donations will keep you going. Edna exhaled. She really thought of everything. She did, he replied softly. But you're the one bringing it to life. The second floor was Edna's private space now, her home. The nursery, once frozen in time, was finally alive with laughter and motion. Her baby, named Margaret Dorothy Williams, after both the women who had stood by her, slept peacefully in the crib that had waited so long. Each morning, Edna moved through the house with quiet purpose. She greeted visitors, stocked shelves, led small group meetings. She worked tirelessly but with peace in her heart. Every nail repaired, every meal shared, every tear wiped away made the house feel warmer. The neighbors who had once been strangers were now her partners. Mrs. Chen came 3 times a week to organize food donations and teach cooking classes for young mothers. Dorothy Harper handled scheduling and spent afternoons rocking the babies while the mothers filled out job applications. Mr. Kowalski fixed anything that creaked or leaked, refusing payment every time. In the evenings, Edna would sit in the kitchen after closing, sipping tea and reading Margaret's journal once more. She often paused at the final line, "One woman's turning point can become another's beginning." One Thursday afternoon, as Edna sorted through mail, her phone buzzed. A familiar name flashed on the screen, Marcus. Her chest tightened. She hadn't heard from him since the night he left. For a moment, she thought of ignoring the call. But she answered. "Edna." His voice came through, uncertain, softer than she remembered. "I heard about what you're doing. A friend from the restaurant shared a post about Hartwell House. I wanted to say congratulations. You've done something incredible." "Thank you," she said simply. "I want to help," he continued. "Financially, I mean. I've saved some money. Maybe it could go toward the center or for the baby." She smiled gently, even though he couldn't see it. "That's kind of you, Marcus, but it's okay. We're doing fine." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Some circles don't need completing," she said quietly. "They were never meant to be closed, just understood." There was a pause. Then a sigh. "You sound happy." "I am," she replied. "And I hope you find your own kind of peace, too." After she hung up, Edna stepped outside. The late afternoon sun washed the front of the house in gold. Across the street, a group of young women laughed as they carried boxes of supplies inside. A few children played on the steps, their laughter carrying into the open windows. This was what Margaret had dreamed of, not just walls and rooms, but lives intertwined through kindness. As Edna looked up at the plaque once more, her daughter stirred in her arms. "We're home, baby girl," she whispered. "We're finally home." For the first time in years, Edna didn't feel like she was starting over. She felt like she was continuing something sacred, something that began long before her and would live on long after. The first clients arrived at Hartwell House on a cloudy Monday morning. The small waiting area smelled faintly of soap and cinnamon muffins. 2 young women sat nervously on the old floral couch, hands folded, unsure if they even belonged there. Edna remembered that same uncertainty, how it felt to walk into a place hoping for help but expecting judgment. She welcomed them with her warmest smile. "You're in the right place," she said softly. "We'll figure it out together." Their relief was almost visible. Within weeks, the house began to fill daily. Expectant mothers came seeking food, diapers, or someone to listen. Volunteers from the neighborhood offered time and supplies. Slowly, the brownstone became a refuge, its walls echoing with quiet laughter and shared stories. Every woman who walked through those doors carried her own storm, yet something about the space, its calm colors, the hum of the coffee pot, the way Edna spoke without pity, made them believe tomorrow could still hold light. During a small support meeting one afternoon, as the group circled up with notebooks and cups of tea, one young mother asked, "Miss Edna, what made you start this place?" Edna hesitated. She rarely talked about herself. But the question opened a door she hadn't walked through in a long time. "It began with one afternoon," she said, her voice steady. "A single cleaning job that changed everything." The room quieted as she let her mind drift back to 2019. She remembered the smell of lemon polish and the sound of an old clock ticking in that same brownstone. She had been sent by the agency to clean for an elderly woman named Mrs. Hartwell. It was supposed to be just 4 hours, dusting, vacuuming, wiping surfaces. But nothing about that day had gone as expected. Mrs. Hartwell had greeted her with a gentle smile and asked her to sit for tea before starting. Edna was confused. No client had ever asked her to sit down first. Usually, people acted as if she were invisible, moving around her like furniture. "You work long hours?" Mrs. Hartwell had asked. "Yes. 3 jobs, most days," Edna had replied, unsure how much to share. "Do you like what you do?" Edna had paused, cloth in hand. "It pays the bills." Mrs. Hartwell nodded knowingly. "I taught for 30 years. I used to think that made me useful. But lately, I wonder if usefulness is measured by what we earn or by how we make people feel." They talked while Edna cleaned, about books, about childhood dreams that had been set aside for survival, about invisible labor. At one point, Edna mentioned her love for reading but admitted she hadn't opened a book in years. Mrs. Hartwell disappeared for a moment, then returned holding a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. "Keep it," she said. "Every woman should own at least one book that reminds her of courage." By the time Edna finished cleaning, the 4 hours had stretched into 6. As she prepared to leave, Mrs. Hartwell pressed an extra envelope into her hand. "For your time and for your conversation," she'd said simply. Edna remembered walking home that night feeling lighter, though she couldn't explain why. It wasn't the extra pay, it was the way Mrs. Hartwell had seen her, not as help, but as a person with thoughts, dreams, and worth. That brief connection, 2 women from different worlds sharing tea and truth, had unknowingly planted the roots of everything that would come later. Back in the present, Edna looked around the circle of women listening intently. "That day taught me something," she said. "Sometimes one moment of being truly seen can change the direction of a life. Mrs. Hartwell didn't give me advice or money back then. She gave me dignity. And when she left this house to me, she gave me a chance to do the same for others." The women nodded silently. Some wiped tears. Others reached for each other's hands. One by one, they began to share their own stories, of partners who left, jobs lost, families who turned away, but also of small mercies that had kept them going. Weeks later, several of them began volunteering, helping new arrivals, sorting donations, organizing workshops. The house became a living network of care. Rosa, a former client who had once come for food assistance, started teaching sewing classes. Amira, who had arrived 6 months pregnant and terrified, now led evening mindfulness sessions. They didn't just receive, they gave back, building the kind of world they wished had existed when they needed help most. Each day, Edna watched the ripple spread further. What began with one act of kindness had become a wave touching dozens of lives. Sometimes, after closing, she would stand in the empty meeting room and feel it all: the laughter, the shared courage, the faint echo of a voice from years ago offering tea. Hartwell House was no longer just a home. It was living proof that kindness, once given, never ends. It simply moves from one heart to another, multiplying quietly, endlessly, like light passing through open hands. One quiet afternoon, months after the center had found its rhythm, Edna sat with Dorothy Harper on the porch steps sipping lemonade. The sun warmed the brick walls, and children's laughter floated from the nearby park. Dorothy had a soft smile as she spoke about the woman who had once lived next door. "Margaret was a teacher her whole life," Dorothy said. "Even after she retired, she never stopped teaching. Only, her lessons changed. They weren't about books anymore, they were about people." Edna listened, eager to learn more about the woman whose kindness had rewritten her destiny. Dorothy told her how Margaret had helped neighborhood kids with schoolwork, paid for uniforms, and even tutored at the library long after her heart had begun to weaken. She used to say, "If I can help one child believe they matter, then I've done my job." A few days later, while sorting through old documents in the office upstairs, Edna came across a sealed envelope marked Addendum to Last Will and Testament, Confidential. Her breath caught as she carefully opened it. Inside was a single page in the same shaky handwriting she had come to recognize. To whoever carries this house forward, it read, know that it is not to be owned, but to be used. Hartwell House may never be sold, rented, or turned for profit. Its walls are meant to protect, not to possess. Let it always stand as a home for women who need a new beginning. Edna held the letter against her chest, tears falling freely. Margaret hadn't just given her a house, she had built a permanent sanctuary. The thought humbled her deeply. This was never about charity or chance. It was Margaret's design all along, a continuation of a lifetime spent lifting others quietly. That week, Edna decided to learn more about Margaret's life. She began visiting people who had known her, piecing together the legacy that stretched far beyond Maple Street. At the community library, the head librarian recognized Margaret's name immediately. She was one of our most dedicated volunteers, the woman said. Used to come in every Thursday afternoon, always asking for books for her students. But half the time, those students were grown women trying to get their jeds. Later, at a nearby cafe, a waitress overheard their conversation. You're talking about Miss Hartwell? She paid my nursing school fees, she said. Never took credit. Just told me to pass it on when I could. Each story revealed another thread of compassion woven into Margaret's life. Dozens of people, students, neighbors, young mothers, had all been touched by her generosity, most without even knowing its source. One morning, as Edna was arranging donated clothes in the center storage room, a gentle knock came at the door. An elderly woman stood there, leaning on a cane. Her silver hair framed kind, bright eyes. Excuse me, she said softly. Is this the Hartwell house? Yes, Edna replied. How can I help you? I was Margaret's student. Back in 1974. Edna quickly led her inside, offering her a chair. The woman introduced herself as Mrs. Thompson. I was 16, she began, voice trembling. My parents couldn't afford college, but someone paid my tuition anonymously. I never knew who it was until years later. It was Margaret. She smiled faintly, tears welling. I became a teacher because of her. I taught for 40 years, just like she did. I guess her kindness kept teaching through me. Hearing that, Edna's throat tightened. She changed my life too, she whispered. Mrs. Thompson reached out and held Edna's hand. Then she did exactly what she hoped to do, make sure none of us stood alone. That night, after everyone had gone home, Edna walked through the quiet halls of the brownstone. The soft creak of the old wooden floorboards felt almost like whispers from the past. Every photograph on the wall, every document on the desk, told a story of a woman who had lived not for recognition but for purpose. She paused by the plaque outside the front door, a home for new beginnings, in memory of Margaret Hartwell. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the polished bronze. For the first time, Edna fully understood the depth of what Margaret had created. This wasn't a single act of generosity. It was a network of compassion that had been building quietly for decades, each good deed feeding the next. Margaret hadn't just saved her. She had designed a living structure where kindness could multiply endlessly. The next morning, Edna shared Margaret's story during a volunteer meeting. She spoke not as a beneficiary but as a torchbearer of a greater vision. Margaret didn't just leave me a house, she said. She left me a blueprint for how to love without measure. Silence followed, then quiet applause. Several women wiped away tears. Hartwell House was no longer just an inheritance, it was a movement. Every act of kindness that took place within its walls, every meal served, every baby clothed, every woman comforted, was part of that growing circle Margaret had begun so many years ago. Standing in the doorway later that evening, Edna whispered to herself, she built a home for all of us. And we'll keep it alive. The city lights glowed softly across Maple Street, And somewhere deep inside, Edna felt the presence of the woman who had once offered her tea and conversation, smiling still through the legacy she left behind. Snow had begun to fall over Maple Street, each flake catching the glow of the lampposts before settling gently on the iron railing. From the window of Hartwell House, Edna stood cradling her baby girl against her shoulder. The infant's small fingers reached toward the glass, fascinated by the drifting white. "See that, sweetheart?" Edna whispered, smiling softly. "That's your first snow." The brownstone was warm behind her, alive with laughter and voices. Downstairs, volunteers decorated a modest tree in the front room. Children ran through the halls with ribbons, their giggles echoing off walls that had once held only silence. What was once a house of memory had become a home of momentum. Every room breathed purpose now. Edna looked down at her daughter, tiny, content, and safe. She kissed her forehead. "You're named after someone very special," she murmured. "She saw me when the world taught people to look away." As she spoke, her thoughts drifted to that afternoon 5 years ago when she first met Mrs. Hartwell. The house had smelled faintly of lemon polish and paper. Margaret had offered her tea, asked her questions about her favorite books, and listened as if every word mattered. No one had ever done that before, not in that quiet, genuine way. That single afternoon had changed everything. What Edna thought was just a cleaning job had instead become a turning point, a reminder that even a brief moment of kindness could ripple across years, reshaping lives. Now, standing where Margaret once stood, Edna could feel the full circle of it all. The invisible maid had become the director of a thriving women's center, guiding others to safety and self-worth. The brownstone itself had evolved from a silent monument of solitude to a beacon of grace. The doorbell rang, breaking her reverie. She shifted baby Margaret onto her hip and went downstairs. The front room was filled with neighbors, volunteers, and women who now called Hartwell House their refuge. Dorothy Harper stood near the fireplace, holding a steaming casserole dish wrapped in a red cloth. "You're early as always," Edna teased. "Can't help it," Dorothy chuckled. "Old habits." The celebration began in earnest. Songs, stories, shared food, and the easy warmth that came from people who had weathered storms and found shelter together. Candles glowed on the mantel beneath a framed photo of Mrs. Hartwell. Someone had tucked a sprig of holly beside it. As the evening drew to a close, Dorothy called for everyone's attention. "Before we finish," she said, voice thick with emotion, "there's something I think Edna should know, something Margaret told me the night before she passed." The room grew still. She said, "Tell Edna the nursery was never empty. It was waiting." A hush settled over everyone. Edna pressed her lips together, holding her daughter close. The words sank deep, unfolding something tender and wordless inside her. Margaret had known. Even then, she had been preparing a space not out of nostalgia, but hope for a child she'd never meet and a mother she believed in. Tears welled in Edna's eyes, not from sadness, but gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. Dorothy nodded, wiping her own. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the fire burned low, Edna walked through the house once more. The garland along the staircase shimmered faintly. Upstairs, the nursery glowed in gentle lamplight. Baby Margaret slept peacefully in her crib, wrapped in a quilt made by the women from the shelter. Edna stood at the doorway, remembering the first time she'd stepped into this room, how stunned she'd been to find it waiting, untouched, as if expecting her. Now she understood. It wasn't a coincidence. It was intention. Margaret had built this future long before Edna arrived. She whispered into the quiet, "You kept your promise. The nursery isn't empty anymore." The snow outside thickened, blanketing the street in silence. Edna moved to the window again, gazing at the soft white world beyond. Her reflection looked back at her, a woman transformed, standing in the same place Margaret once had, carrying her legacy forward. For a long moment, she simply stood there, breathing it all in. The house hummed faintly with life below, dishes clinking, a baby's soft sigh, the murmur of community. Edna thought of the years behind her, the loneliness, the doubt, the moment she almost gave up, and how they had all led her here. She thought of Margaret's belief that kindness wasn't a gesture, but an architecture, a way of building something that lasts. She rested her hand on the windowpane, watching snowflakes melt against the warmth. Kindness plants seeds in soil we cannot see, she whispered. Growing forests we may never walk through, sheltering souls we've only briefly touched. Baby Margaret stirred slightly, then settled again. Edna smiled. Outside, Maple Street lay quiet and bright, the old brownstone standing strong against the winter night, a testament to love that transcends time, to compassion that never ends, and to the invisible threads that bind one generation's grace to the next. And there, in that simple, luminous moment, Edna knew, the legacy was alive. Margaret Hartwell's gift to Edna reminds us that we never truly know how our smallest acts of kindness might echo through time. A simple gesture, a kind word, or a moment of compassion can become the turning point in someone else's life, and sometimes, even in our own. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss more powerful true stories like this one. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from, and share a time when someone's unexpected kindness changed your life. We'd love to hear your story. Your likes, comments, and subscriptions help us reach more people who need to hear messages of hope and humanity. Thank you for being part of our growing community, and for believing in the power of kindness to change the world, one act, one person, and one story at a time.